Today, you're going to describe the structure and function of DNA by creating a digital model. So I posted the classwork assignment on the Google Classroom. You're going to actually do a drag and drop activity to model DNA. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the warm up. There we go. I just want to make sure that it's there. All right, so with the warm up, I want you to explain to me or identify which macromolecule is responsible for giving us our traits. And then where does this macromolecule come from? So that's the warm up. I'll have that this way. Let's see. All right, so Aubrey is working. I'm still waiting for everybody else. They pull theirs up. Asha, how are we working out today? I know sometimes Nearpod gives you a hard time. I see Holly. All right, so Treasure, you can't get on the Nearpod. The warm up in the video is basically the only thing that's going to be, as far as you being involved, excuse me, with the Nearpod, it's the only thing. So I am going to post the video for you to do the classwork. And so, but are you able to see when I'm presenting? Because I'm going to present just a little information about DNA. Okay, cool beans. All right, so, but if you want to answer the question in the chat box, that would be fine. If you can tell me which macromolecule is, let's see what the question, responsible for giving us traits. And that's for anybody else that's experiencing some issues with Nearpod. And then where does this macromolecule come from? There we go. All right, so Here we go. So which macromolecule is responsible for our traits or giving us traits? And so Asha says comes from amino acids, which are a form of proteins. Okay. What else? Let's see. It comes from nucleic acids. Yes. All right. So it comes from nucleic acids. So I can see why Asha, when it comes to you saying that it comes from amino acids, remember amino acids, are they're proteins and they're normally specific for like as far as different for specific functions, right? And so I can see how when you talk about with DNA, when we talk about the nitrogenous bases as far as adenine, guanine, thymine, and so those are, you can basically say, you can probably think that those are the amino acids, but we're actually referring to nucleic acids when we're talking about DNA. And because it's those nitrogenous bases and the sugar phosphate backbone that actually makes up DNA. And so, and of course, the bonds in between those nitrogen bases with their complementary base pairs. But we'll go over that. And so that's what you're going to learn today. All right. So they come from nucleic acids. And so where do we get nucleic acids from as far as the macromolecule? Where do we get the nucleic acids from? So nucleotides would be, remember when we talked about our monomers or our building blocks with macromolecules? So remember we talked about those? And so nucleotides would be that monomer or that building block for DNA. But where do we get nucleic acids from? Remember we talked about how macromolecules, how we basically get them from, excuse me, certain things. So where do we get them from? You remember so deoxyribonucleic acid is what DNA stands for. Hold on. I'm not sure. I'm looking at the answers and nobody has it. All right. So with macromolecules, remember we have 4 macromolecules, right? What are the 4 macromolecules? We have protein. That's 1. What else? Carbs. Okay. 2 down, 2 more to go. Lipids. And what else? Nucleic acids. All right. So we have our carbohydrates, we have our lipids, we have our proteins, we have our nucleic acids. Where do we get our macro as animals? How do we get or obtain our macromolecules? How do we get it? Because we know we need carbs for energy, right? So how do we get it? Yes, thank you, Ibrahim. From food, all right? So we get our lipids, we get our carbohydrates, we get our proteins, we also get our nucleic acids from foods, right? But also, when it comes to DNA, right? DNA is going to be genetic material essentially, right? So it's genetic material that's passed on from one organism to the next, right? All right, so that's where we basically get, as far as us, our genetic information from our genetic material. We get it from our parents or, ancestors. And so it's basically essentially where it comes from. All right. Good job, everybody. All right. So, as you guys know, it's February and it is Black History Month. And so I am going to, for this month, when we cover certain information, I'm going to try to incorporate a little Black history into into that lesson that pertains to what we're learning about. So because we're learning about DNA structure and function, I thought it was only right to basically incorporate Henrietta Lacks into our lesson today. All right, so Henrietta Lacks, she was a Black woman who ended up at Johns Hopkins Hospital. She was complaining of discomfort and bleeding from her abdomen. Well, I don't know if you guys know, but back then, Johns Hopkins was one of the few hospitals that treated Black people and African Americans, especially Black people and African Americans from impoverished areas. All right. So upon examination, the doctor noticed that Henrietta had a malignant tumor on her cervix. And so a sample of her, the malignant tumor, of course, a malignant tumor forms from cancer cells. And so a sample of her cancer cells were sent to Dr. George, I think his name is Gee. And he had a tissue lab where he was always investigating human cells and tissue. And so he ended up discovering that Henrietta or Mrs. Lacks cells were unlike any other that he has ever seen, because the tissue samples and the cells that he had in his lab, they would die, and they wouldn't last long enough for him to actually study them. And so he kept trying, but he just really couldn't figure it out. Like, why are these cells dying on me? But when it came to Henrietta, her cells, they actually doubled every 20 to 24 hours. So her cells actually kept growing. And so they were staying alive. And so this was a new phenom, that was occurring, and they never seen it before. And so when this happened, they actually started using her cells for research. So the cells were actually in the end called the HeLa cells. And so the HeLa cells is what they use to study the effects of toxins, drugs, hormones, and viruses on the growth of cancer cells without experimenting on humans. So because of Henrietta Lacks, her cells basically opened that doorway for a lot of doctors to understand cancer biology. All right, so that's our little Black history moment for today, or lesson for today. All right, any questions about Henrietta Lacks and the HeLa cells? All right, so with DNA, and I think Casey had put it out there, DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acids, right? And so it's a molecule that contains genetic information for our cells. And so with cells, remember, cells are specific. And so, you have your somatic cells and you have your germ cells. And so your somatic cells are normally your cells that are produced through mitosis. And then your germ cells are, the ones that's produced through meiosis. And so with meiosis, remember, they produce sex cells. But when it comes to our cells, all of our cells are specific. All right. And so, we have our liver cells that's specific for the structure and function of our liver. We have muscle cells that would be specific for our structure and function of our muscles. All right. And so in those cells, which, DNA is inside of the nucleus, within all of those cells, each one of those cells has its own genetic information. All right, so DNA carries all of the information about how a living thing will look and function. All right, so for instance, DNA is responsible for eye color, is responsible for hair color. So it's responsible for a whole lot of things. And like it says, it carries all of the information about how a living thing will look and function. Okay. And so the shape of DNA. So DNA, it looks like a ladder, a twisted ladder, per se. And so that structure is it's a double helical structure. And so the size of DNA is comprised of sugar and phosphate. And so that's what makes the backbone. And then the rungs, or you can say the little stairs or steps inside of the ladder, are made of the nitrogenous bases. And so those nitrogenous bases we are going to get into, but it's 4 of them. All right. All right, so this is where our nitrogenous bases are located. They're located on the inside. Remember, I said on the rungs or the steps of the ladder. And so there are 4 bases. We have adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. All right. And so what bases are always together? Well, adenine always pairs with thymine. And then cytosine always pair with guanine. Unless we're talking about RNA, where adenine will actually pair with your cell, but we're talking about DNA, all right? And so hopefully you guys will be able to remember what pairs with what. And so the way I teach my students, as far as remembering, as for the nitrogenous bases, as the base pairing, I always use this mnemonic aid: apples in the tree, cars in the garage. So when you think about that, apples, adenine, that's in the tree, thymine, and then cars, cytosine, that's in the garage, guanine. All right. So A with T, C with G. All right. So now you guys are going to watch a video on Amoeba Sisters, and then you are going to complete the worksheet that is like a video note sheet. And then it's a drag and drop activity that I want you guys to complete. And so I think, do I have the right video up? Let's see. Yes. All right. So I'm going to play this video. I got to mute myself. Give me a second. Any questions before we get into the video? So we have 4 nitrogenous bases. What are those 4 nitrogenous bases? Adenine. Thank you, Casey. I appreciate you participating today. Adenine, thymine, cytosine, guanine. There we go. Very good. Casey and Ibrahim. All right. So those are our 4 nitrogenous bases. All right. And so a nucleotide, which I forgot to cover that, but a nucleotide will be made up of your sugar phosphate and a nitrogenous base. All right. So a sugar phosphate and or 1 nitrogenous base. So I can essentially have my nucleotide where it's a sugar phosphate and an adenine, right? And then my other nucleotide would be a sugar phosphate. And what about the complementary base for adenine? So I'm trying to get you guys to build a nucleotide. So what's the complementary base for adenine? Nobody? Thank you, Holly. Yes. All right, it's thymine. So it's adenine with thymine. Apples in the tree, cars in the garage. All right. So my nucleotide that has a sugar phosphate backbone, so it has a sugar phosphate and adenine, is going to pair with the nucleotide that has a sugar phosphate and thymine. All right. So please try to remember this mnemonic aid: apples in the tree, cars in the garage. And it really, really help you as far as knowing the complementary base pairing. All right, so I'm going to put myself on mute and then I'm going to play the video. And that way I think, Treasure, you'll still be able to see the video. I'm going to go ahead and let the video run through. And I posted the notes on the notes worksheet on Google Classroom, but I'm also going to upload the video as well. That way you have access to it.